They have a representative, Ilhan Omar, who they say married her brother. It's a fraud. She tries to deny it now, but you can't really deny it because, it just happened. She shouldn't be allowed to be a congresswoman, and I'm sure people are looking at that.
All right, guys, did Congresswoman Ilhan Omar marry her own brother? We're done dancing around pretending that's a crazy question to ask. We're going to use Omar's own records, the timelines, the people who were there, and give you the real answer. And the truth is even more sick and twisted than anything you could imagine, so don't go anywhere. The official story is that Ilhan Omar arrived in the United States in 1995 when she was 12 or 13, and she came with her father and her grandfather. But this is where the first hole in her story appears. See, Somali people get their names in a very specific way. Their first name is their own given name. Then their second name is their father's first name. So in this case, Ilhan Omar's father's name is Nur Omar Muhammad. So her middle name or second name would be Nur. But her real name is Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, which would mean that her real father's name is Abdullahi. Yet the Omar lines up because her father's name, Nur Omar Muhammad, means that his father was named Omar. Now keep all this in mind because this is going to be very important later on. So in the year 2000, Ilhan Omar becomes a U.S. citizen. In 2002, she marries her first husband, Ahmed Hersi, and they have 2 children together. Now, they get divorced in 2008, and in 2009 is when she supposedly married her brother, Ahmed Elmi. Now, while she's still married to her second husband, her alleged brother, Elmi, she has another child in 2012 with her first husband. She doesn't divorce Elmi until 2017, and then she remarries her first husband, Hersi. However, just 1 year after remarrying her first husband, she starts having an affair with a political consultant, Tim Minette, who's also cheating on his wife with Omar, and then she divorces her first husband for a second time. Now, even if we set the brother rumor aside, that is a serious paperwork game going on there. She was married for 8 years to one man while having children with another man, and if you weren't keeping track, that means she was married 4 times to 3 different men. So who is Ahmed Elmi? Well, the first thing about him that's important to note is that his name is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Now, if you remember, Ilhan Omar's father's name was Nur. So according to Ahmed Elmi's name, his father's name is also Nur. So judging by his name, him and Ilhan Omar have a father with the same name. Now, a story recently broke on Ahmed Elmi, and it's truly shocking. Apparently, he has social media profiles where he goes by the name The Dandy Daddy, and he's dressed very flamboyantly. He's wearing these short shorts. He was described to wear lipstick. He's also referring to Ilhan Omar's children as his nieces and nephews. Now, that social media profile has since been deleted, but I think it's very clear to see by just simply looking at this guy that he definitely has a little extra sugar in his tank. And if you have any doubts about that, Elmi studied for his PhD in gender studies and was a research assistant in queer theory, and he's been spotted with people like this guy. Not to mention that a friend of Omar and her first husband Hersi, Abdehakim Osman, said that back then when Omar was supposedly with Elmi, that she introduced him to everybody as her brother and said that she was trying to help him with paperwork, and she never once introduced him as her husband, and their marriage was performed by a Christian pastor and nobody from the Somali community was invited. Now, Osman said that's because a Muslim imam would have immediately noticed that they were brother and sister and refused to perform the ceremony. And not only that, but in the Muslim tradition, if a marriage isn't done in a religious ceremony, they don't recognize it. So they could say to themselves that they weren't married and that it was just for paperwork. And at the time, this was before Ilhan Omar was in Congress. Her first husband, Hersi, was actually more well-known in the Somali community. So Osman said the real scandal was that Hersi's brother-in-law, in this case being Elmi, was so effeminate and flamboyant and wearing short shorts and lipstick lipstick that everybody in the community was disgusted by it. But the bottom line is, according to a guy who was actually there, the marriage to Elmi was kept quiet. Nobody ever thought he was her husband, and it was done purely to get paperwork. And you have to ask yourself, why would Omar do something like this if Elmi wasn't her biological brother? She went out of her way to marry the guy, to commit immigration fraud, to commit marriage fraud, to introduce him all over to people as her brother. Going through all this just for somebody who was a casual friend really doesn't make sense. So that just reinforces the idea that Elmi actually is Ilhan Omar's brother. But if that isn't enough for you, back in 2021, a Republican research firm trying to do opposition research on Omar spent over $200,000 on private investigators. Now, they claim to have taken photographs like this of Ilhan Omar smoking cigarettes at her residence. They also took photographs of Elmi. But they said that they turned in these cigarette butts, Coca-Cola cans, all different objects, and they got a DNA test done. And the results of that DNA test show that Elmi and Ilhan Omar, with a 99.99% probability, are in fact siblings. Now, obviously, I haven't verified that. They have a website up right now. I think it's called IlhanOmarDNA.com that you can check out yourself. But obviously, if that's true, that would settle this case. If convicted on the marriage fraud or immigration fraud, Omar could be facing up to 5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines. But the problem is that on the marriage fraud, the statute of limitations is 5 years, so it looks like that's already passed. Now, there is a debate on the immigration fraud if whether the statute of limitations starts to run when you actually discover the fraud. Now, if that were the case, then Omar could still be charged. But again, that's debatable. So to answer our original question, did Ilhan Omar marry her own brother? Well, based on the way their names are, the paperwork, the witness testimony of the people who were there, the 8-year sham marriage, and then the alleged DNA test, it looks very likely that Omar did, in fact, marry her own brother. But even if she didn't, at a minimum, she committed immigration fraud, marriage fraud, and she needs to be held accountable for that. Now, it's up to the people in D.C. if they actually have a spine to commit an investigation and throw her out of Congress, but the voters don't need them to conduct an investigation for us to connect the dots. And the answer seems pretty obvious here. Ilhan Omar is the worst of us, and she has no business in the U.S. Congress. Stories like this have been circulating for years for a reason. And then she claims to be a devout Muslim, but we see her being married 4 times to 3 different men, having children with other men while she's married. This lady has no morals, and she sits up there and she preaches at us about how we should behave and how wrong we are, and tells us everything that's wrong with the United States of America. But I think we've had enough of Ilhan Omar. Now, guys, I'm asking you to help support this channel by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing. Thanks, guys.